Watch right now on the Front News Project. Panic in Russia, a new offensive by the armed forces of Ukraine in Kurshchina, and meanwhile, military facilities are burning all over Russia. A fiery bag for the occupiers in Donbass, fierce fighting. From Poltava, Russia continues the genocide of peaceful Ukrainians. Fiery, hot, and blazing footage from the front lines. Watch, right now. The bloody war continues. The war that Vladimir Putin and his pack have unleashed on Ukrainian soil. The heroic resistance of the Ukrainian armed forces and the entire Ukrainian people continues in their fight for freedom. Greetings, this is Front News. Vladimir Timoshenko here with you. In the next 30 minutes, you'll get the truth about the war, which our journalists are uncovering from the hottest battle zones. So, are you ready? Then what we begin. And we start right away with exclusive material. The so-called Z-War correspondents are in a frenzy. According to them, 6 months after the start of the Kursk operation, the armed forces of Ukraine have launched another offensive. But you know, even without this news, Putin's lackeys definitely aren't in the mood for laughter. This week, military facilities on the territory of Russia were once again burning and blazing. Bryansk region, Tver region. Nizhny Novgorod and, of course, the Volgograd oil refinery, which is one of the largest in Russia. Get all the details about the new explosions in Putin's Russia right now in an exclusive piece by TSN journalist Oksana Rodionova.
Ukrainian drones this week finally reached the Russian friendship, hitting right at the most painful spot, which affects the entire export of this oil. They struck the Novosilka linear oil pumping station, the 8N dispatch station, Transneft facilities in Bryansk region. Through them, Moscow pumps oil to the Belarusian oil refinery for Europe. The explosion's flames were even recorded by NASA's space stations. But the real intrigue has unfolded around the weapons that our side used during this attack. This is a photo of a drone with a 250-kilogram bomb that has filled the network. It was claimed that the Russian oil pipeline was bombed by Ukrainian bomber drones. Each one carried one such aerial bomb, the FAB-250M54, and two smaller projectiles visually resembling artillery mines. Subsequently, the command of the drone systems confirmed the information.
The SBS command in this confirms the use of a long-range UAV, capable of carrying 250-kilogram aerial bomb and cover up to 2,000 kilometers with the ability to return.
There have already been dozens of missions, a quarter of a ton. These are completely different capabilities. It seems like we're succeeding. To scale not only the number of attacks, their range, but also the payload of the UAVs. And the consequences of even the latest operations are hard to overestimate. The figures are swinging between millions and billions of dollars as the drones also hit the oil pumping station. Andriapol, the Baltic pipeline system 2A in the Tver region, according to sources from TSN Week in the Security Service of Ukraine, the filtration pump stations and tanks at the facility were damaged. Oil products spilled, a fire broke out, and the Russians were forced to shut down the main pipeline, through which oil is supplied to the Ust-Luga terminal, and as Bloomberg reports, the main oil port of Russia, Ust-Luga, near St. Petersburg on the Baltic Sea, which is among the 5 largest ports in Europe, has stopped loading tankers after the drone attack. It's important to understand that it's through this port that tankers export every 5th barrel of sanctioned Russian oil, 20% of the total volume, and the sanctions against the tanker fleet have already weakened the port's operations. The attack by our drones on the night of Thursday was the second largest of the year. Russians were closing airports and reporting about 100 UAVs and attacks on 9 regions at once. The target of the swarm of drones was Lukoil's precious jewel, the oil refinery near Nizhny Novgorod. This is the refinery, Putin's pride. Ultra-modern with unique equipment, it is the 4th largest fuel producer in Russia. They produce a significant portion of the highest quality gasoline, in particular, 98th. The enemy invested about $1 billion in modernization and Western equipment. After the attack, the refinery halted operations.
Look, these drones cost, let's say, several $1 million, but they cause damage worth billions. Because really, any installation at the plant can cost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. It's time. The ambulance has left. Just now there was another explosion, and now most likely another ambulance will be on the way.
This week, the Volgograd oil refinery was also hit. It is also one of the largest in Russia. And this is not the first attack by our drones on this oil refinery.
Do you know what is burning? I don't know what is burning. Look at this. Look. It looks like oil is burning. A drone can't destroy an oil refinery. You just need to understand this. This facility sometimes spans tens of square kilometers. But that doesn't mean it shouldn't have been done. These burned resources which they won't be able to produce anymore, which they've lost, all of this weakens them. Because it's not producing, because it needs repairs, because supply chains are disrupted, deliveries are cut off, it's still very effective.
And if you add in the shutdown of oil pipelines, it all looks like a calculated collapse of the gas station country system. Ukraine is hitting targets precisely, not only at oil refineries, but also at defense industry facilities, airfields, and weapon depots. Drones struck the Siversk facility, which supplies raw materials for the production of explosives. The target of this week was also the 23rd Missile Arsenal, the Russian Ministry of Defense in the Tver region. Drones hit the warehouse itself and 3 buildings of the military unit, and on Friday, the missile and artillery units precisely struck the command post of the Russians in Rylsk in the Kursk region. They aren't saying which Russian commanders have been eliminated yet, but in the deep Russian rear, under the general's doors, in what seem to be secure apartments, they have already started delivering funeral wreaths. One this week from our special services, Major General Vitaly Terekin, the commander of the 150th Motorized Rifle Division, received it. Whether it will be a scooter or some other transport to the other side, our specialists are still considering.
The new strike drone Lightning One is being launched by the Russians more frequently against Kharkiv. The Russians launched a targeted massive attack on the historic center of Odessa. Well, of course, that's a separate chapter. A strike on a high-rise building in Poltava. As a result of the attack, an entire entrance collapsed. 14 dead, including 3 children. TSN Week journalist Alina Lisova visited the site of the rescue operation, where they held out hope until the very end of finding survivors.
A column of black smoke, ruins all around, human screams and cries. So the Russians started Saturday morning for Poltava.
That's not right. It's like this. It exploded so violently that it literally threw me off my bed. I went deaf and the windows shattered. I'm on the first floor looking up, all the glass is falling, everything is crumbling. God, it's such a horror that it's impossible to convey, to experience all of this. That cannot be conveyed to them.
A missile that hit a residential building destroyed all 5 floors of one of the entrances. A mountain of crushed bricks and concrete, which used to be human apartments, was finished off by the fire. Lyudmila, who lives, or rather lived, in the same building, can't hold back her tears, even though her entrance is still standing.
I realized right away because my windows faced that way. When I looked out, everything was black, cars were burning, there was a column of smoke and fire. What probably saved me was that I had my windows open, I didn't close them.
By a miracle, Elena's family managed to survive. She was still sleeping with her husband and daughters during the missile attack. She says, it all happened very quickly.
It just crashed like that and everything is smoking, everything is on fire. And there was still a car parked under the entrance. I peek out and say to my husband, the cars are gone.
Only a wall separates Elena's apartment from the epicenter of the explosion. Her apartment is now without windows. It ripped out the frame, took the balcony away.
And here, I know that there is no family. A girl was running, little Sonia. There is neither a woman nor a man nor a child.
At the scene of the tragedy, nearly 500 rescuers and other services were working. The most important thing for them was to find those who survived under the rubble. And fortunately to dig out, they managed to rescue 22 people, 20 of whom are injured. The work didn't stop even at night, but on Sunday there were fewer good news. On Sunday, around 5 in the evening, the State Emergency Service reported that the rescue operations had finally been completed. As a result of the Russian attack, the strike killed 14 people, 2 of whom were children. Among the victims of the Russian attack was the entire Yavorsky family. A 37-year-old man, his wife, and their 9-year-old daughter.
There were also familiar faces under the rubble, you know, people we knew. Well, what will they say? Tomorrow on Russian television, yet another NATO base has been destroyed. After all, these are just ordinary people.
According to the Ukrainian Air Force, the Russians attacked a residential building in Poltava with a Kh-22 missile. A similar missile was launched by the occupiers in June 2022 at the Amster shopping center in Kremenchuk. It is known that this is an old Soviet supersonic missile that was developed to target large ships.
All fragments extracted from the missile are safe and have been handed over to the investigative authorities for further investigative actions.
In addition to the completely destroyed entrance, more than 15 neighboring apartment buildings and a nearby kindergarten were also damaged.
Well, now let's analyze the operational situation on the long-suffering Pokrovsk front. The enemy continues its military terror. Since the beginning of this day, the invading units have attempted to break through our defenses 28 times near the settlements. Greenfield, Novotoretske, Pokrovsk, Pishane, Udachne, Mirolyubivka, Luch, Lisovka, Kotlyarivka, Uspenivka, Dachne, Andriivka, and Shevchenko. So far, there are still 3 clashes ongoing. The settlement of Novoalexandrovka was subjected to an airstrike with 2 guided bombs. Yes, the enemy is trying to continue its offensive along the entire front line, which now spans over 1,200 kilometers. At the same time, the Russians are suffering enormous losses in the Pokrovsk area. In just January, the Russians lost 7,000 Tollers personnel irretrievably. That's more casualties. More than during the entire Second Chechen War. This was reported by Viktor Trehubov, a representative of the Operational Strategic Group of Troops Kortitsia. To find out what's happening right now in the Pokrovsk area, watch this exclusive report from TSN military correspondent Andriy Tsaplienko.
An aerial bomb landed nearby in a routine manner. Let me remind you that we are somewhere near Pokrovsk. The battery commander is getting his soldiers into cover, but they can't hide there for long. We need to manage the battle to send the enemy a response for the strike. The Caesar howitzer is now moving into position. There is enemy advancement. We need to stop him and stabilize the front line. And it seems that the artillery of the 155th Brigade can handle this task. The French Caesars are operating 24/7. What was that?
Our neighbors are working.
The accuracy of the French artillery is currently preventing the enemy from carrying out their plans. The obvious plan is to bypass Pokrovsk from the north and south and try to encircle the city. The Russians have almost reached the outskirts of Pokrovsk, but they didn't storm it head-on.
The enemy is operating in small assault groups, a maximum of 10 people. Well, there are a lot of them. I call this the Tarakanov tactic. They are trying to distract our attention, advancing simultaneously in small groups in many directions.
If the occupiers manage to establish themselves somewhere in the suburbs of Pokrovsk, the Leopard 2 tanks will swoop into the village. Of the 155th Brigade are dismantling the houses where the enemy infantry is holed up.
The equipment is great, it drives well, and it has an accurate gun. In terms of mobility, there are no analogs, but we already have ours.
We had doubts about whether they would be effective in Pokrovsk. These are wheeled tanks with a 105mm gun.
This is a cumulative shell. These are high explosive fragmentation shells, and here are armor-piercing ones.
But the French quality speaks for itself. The relatively small caliber is compensated by the accuracy of the gun and the maneuverability of the vehicle. So far, the AMX-10 hasn't let us down.
We can quickly roll up on the enemy and just as quickly pull back from them. It's extremely maneuverable thanks to its ability to turn in place.
When an extra second on the battlefield can cost lives, this feature of French technology becomes crucial. And I gathered the leather cover. Every newly created brigade probably goes through a certain period of crisis, and unfortunately the 155th Anna Kievskaya was no exception. But we hope that this period is coming to an end. The guys have learned to fight well with French equipment, and the command has realized that the most important thing in war is not the technology, no matter how advanced it is, but well-trained and motivated people. The 155th Brigade is named after Anna of Kiev, the legendary Queen of France, daughter of Yaroslav the Wise. The only unit named after a woman. First, fully armed and trained by the French. Right now, the 155th Pokrovsk Brigade is a key formation that is holding back the enemy's advance. The fighters are starting to feel that they can stop the Russian assaults. and it was this sense of self-confidence that helped them stabilize the front. But it's possible that the situation around Pokrovsk may worsen. After Ukrainian units withdrew from another key settlement in the Donetsk region, Velyka Novosilka.
Well, now it's time to analyze the operational situation on the Kharkiv and Kupiansk fronts. The enemy army's bloody rampage continues. And here, on the Kharkiv front, our forces repelled one enemy attack near Volchansk. On the Kupiansk front, the enemy conducted 5 assaults on our defenders' positions in the areas of Lozova, Nova Krylyakivka, Petropavlivka, and Zarizove. Ukrainian defenders repelled all enemy attacks. A day of mourning in the Izium community, located in the Kharkiv region. Due to the Iskander strike the day before, 5 people were killed and over 50 were injured. 3 people are in critical condition, including a 14-year-old girl who was urgently taken to the hospital in the regional center. TSN correspondent Yulia Boyko spoke with witnesses of the explosion and is ready to tell more about the destruction in the city and the shattered lives of local residents.
There's dust and smoke in the air. After the explosion, cars are howling. These are the first footage after the Russian Iskander hit the center of the city of Izium. The epicenter of the strike was the administrative buildings where people from all over the area gathered to process their documents. Among them were 2 sisters, 18-year-old Daria and 19-year-old Angelina. The older girl was 15 weeks pregnant. They arrived at the passport office with their mother-in-law and died. Dr. Yuri Kuznetsov, who was one of the few medical professionals in Izium during the occupation, says he has seen a lot during this time, but he will long remember the husband of the deceased Angelina, who ran to the hospital in despair. The soul of a TV host. The soul of a TV host. A TV host.
I can rarely shed a tear, but you know, when a young man in military uniform approached and asked, "Can you tell me where to find my wife and her sister?" They died in this disaster. He is in very serious condition. I think it's an acute reaction to stress.
In total, 5 people died under the rubble, 4 passers-by and a man who was working on the heating in the city council building, which was being restored after the Russian occupation. At that time, there were several dozen people in the building. Visitors and employees of the CPAU, social services, the city council, and the tax office. Most of them are women. We were looking for people under the rubble.
We were searching for people under the rubble. Thank God they found everyone. Everyone is safe. Out of our workers at Logovo, 5 were injured, but thank God they are all alive and well. We have 1 injury, a girl inspector who had to be stitched up, so she has been hospitalized. She is currently in the hospital. The other 4 workers are receiving outpatient treatment.
People in the apartment buildings were also affected. Nearby, they were injured by shards of glass and debris. Ekaterina was busy in the kitchen at that time. She says she survived the occupation and lost her grandson at the front. And this time I almost said goodbye to life myself. No, you leaned over here in your hat.
I just sat down here to adjust my hat and then it hit me. And all this glass from the window came down on me. I wasn't scared at all. For some reason, I didn't realize what had happened.
In total, more than 50 people were injured, including 3 children. 2 are in stable condition, but the 14-year-old girl is in critical condition. She was sent to a hospital in Kharkiv. The regional prosecutor's office says they had no way to protect themselves from the strike. The ballistic missile arrived just seconds after the danger signal.
At the moment of impact, the air raid alert was on, but from the moment the missile was identified on the radar systems to the moment of impact, less than 1 minute passed.
The blast wave damaged dozens of buildings and shattered almost 200 windows. The utility workers worked late into the evening, clearing the debris, boarding up broken windows, and reinforcing structures that could collapse. In memory of the fallen, today is a day of mourning in the Izium community.
Now we move to the Kramatorsk front of the Russian world, where destruction, killing, and injury continue. In the Kramatorsk direction, 2 combat clashes have been recorded near Chasiv Yar, which are still ongoing. The enemy also attacked Bondarn with guided aerial bombs. Also this week, Kremlin terrorists temporarily seized Velyka Novosilka in the Donetsk region. It was indeed an important logistics center for the Ukrainian defense and blocked the way for the occupiers to the areas controlled by Ukraine, part Zaporizhia region. Indeed, now the Russians themselves have found themselves in a fire trap, report our defenders. The enemy is also having a hard time in the long-suffering and battered Bakhmut. All the details in an exclusive piece by TSN military correspondent Andriy Tsaprenko.
A few days ago, the Russians announced the capture of Velyka Novosilka, an important settlement that could open a path for the occupiers to the part of the Zaporizhia region controlled by Ukraine. The front in Velyka Novosilka was held by units of the 110th Brigade, but the enemy's five-fold advantage in numbers played its part.
In terms of numbers, here the factor of their very large numbers comes into play.
So what do you think needs to be done in a global sense?
In a global sense, as they say, we need to continue fighting, continue destroying, continue serving, and we need to reconsider, as they say, the laws of mobilization.
Due to a lack of people, the interaction of units in Velyka Novosilka had already become impossible. The weather helped us get out of the settlement.
They were moving out into the fog right in front of the enemy.
The Russians' path to Velyka Novosilka is marked by war crimes. In the village of Neskushne near Novosilka, they filmed themselves personally killing 6 Ukrainian soldiers. The fate of the 7th is unknown, and this is not the only similar case.
2 factors of confirmation. The first was when there were assault operations on the road to Blagovatnoye. They were rebuilding, they shot, these were Marines, they shot. And in Neskushne they shot 6 on video.
It's likely that the Russians deliberately posted the video footage of their crimes to intimidate the defenders of Velyka Novosilka, but they achieved the opposite effect. The 110th Brigade assures that the Russians will no longer be able to continue their offensive here. The Mokry Yali River, which was causing problems for Ukrainian logistics, has now become a barrier for Russian movement. The enemy has fallen into a fire trap where they are being taken apart by Ukrainian artillery, but it's possible that by capturing Velyka Novosilka, the Russians will be able to redeploy units from here to the Kupiansk direction, where they are having success, or to Pokrovsk, the capture of which is a strategic task for the Kremlin. It's hot right along the entire front line now, but there are areas where the enemy has halted their advance. Here, to the west of Bakhmut, they quickly respond to any movement.
The sky is clear, preparing for battle.
In this direction, the occupiers don't have enough weapons for an offensive. This section of the front is considered relatively calm. Thanks to the well-constructed Ukrainian defense, it doesn't allow the enemy to advance. Several factors are helping us here.
The terrain plays a significant role, and secondly, the enemy, I think they are not ready.
The unusual Croatian Arak-12 rocket systems used by the border guards of the Vengeance Brigade are hitting the fortified positions of the occupiers. As soon as they notice even the slightest movement there,
we have enough ammunition. In our direction, we currently have enough ammunition, while the enemy doesn't have sufficient forces for assaults. As soon as they appear somewhere, we suppress them.
footage, not just ammunition, decides everything. The Border Brigade Miss carefully selects each fighter for the task they need to perform.
If he has a desire to work with MLRs, then we put him on MLRs. If he is a computer scientist, a drone operator, we give him this opportunity.
There are many people fighting here whose homes remain in the occupied territory.
I really want to go back there.
The hope of reclaiming what's theirs is probably the main motivating factor that drives people to do their best in combat tasks and not give up the territory.
Get off our land.
Well, now let's analyze the situation on the Lyman and Siversk fronts. Let's be honest, this is yet another sacred goal for Putin and his pack. Accordingly, the situation here is tense to the limit. In the Lyman direction, over the course of a day, Russian invaders attacked Ukrainian positions near Zeleny 18 times. Hai, Kopanki, Novosergivka, Grekivka, Novo, Zelenaya Dolina, Novolyubovka, Katerinivka, and M, Polovki, Ternov, and Kolodyaziv. In the Siversk direction, the enemy made 2 attempts to advance on our units' positions near Bilohorivka during the day. At the same time, they dropped 2 air bombs on Siversk and Zavanivka. And this week, the Russians once again cruelly and sneakily attacked Ukrainian Kherson. The Russians struck the city center with aerial bombs. The nearby villages to Kherson are also suffering. 3 dozen were under fire. In the region, 1 person died in a day and another 13 were injured. Among the injured are 2 children. They were just riding on a bus that the occupiers hit with a drone. Chronicles of one day in Kherson were gathered by KTSN correspondent Elena Vanina.
the center of the city of Kherson. Around 4 o'clock yesterday, the Russians dropped an aerial bomb here. Instead of beautiful houses, ruins remain here in an instant. 2 residents were rescued from blocked homes and 2 others were injured. A 40-year-old woman sustained blast injuries and another 46-year-old resident was pulled from the rubble. Subtitles were made by Dimitor Zok. She is in serious condition with a traumatic brain injury and shrapnel wounds to her abdomen. People can't recover from what they've been through. The glass shattered. Everything just fell apart for me, but thank God I wasn't hurt. That's the happiness in the kitchen.
I was standing by my metal plastic window, which was the only one left, and it just shifted from its place. And I was thrown against the wall by the wave.
Oksana is going through this for the 2nd time. In December, she arrived at her apartment. Back then, she was barely alive with a broken arm and was rescued from the rubble in the same way. The woman was recently discharged from the hospital. And here comes another strike.
The patient can be handed over to me with words. You can't convey it in words when you know that feeling when you experience it yourself. I was trapped under the rubble myself. It was on this very street. I found myself in my own apartment with 8 little cats. I really feel for that person. I truly sympathize with these people.
An hour before the airstrike, the enemies dropped explosives right into the hatch of a minibus. The cabin caught fire and there were 5 people inside. 3 women and 2 children, a 12-year-old girl and a 13-year-old boy. Everyone has been hospitalized with concussions, explosive injuries, and traumatic brain injuries. And just a few hours before that, Russian military dropped explosives on an ambulance from a drone. The medics miraculously survived.
Acute stress reaction trauma injuries. As of today, their condition is considered closer to satisfactory.
Actually, it was for the trusted one. And this is a high-rise building in the Dnipro district. In the morning, a Russian drone flew in there and a fire broke out, injured. A 74-year-old resident.
Smoke started to rise, and it was so thick that he said, "Call the fire department." I said, "Come on, call them." But I left everything here. I didn't even take my phone. I couldn't get back in.
In the same area, they shelled the private sector. An elderly woman died there. A 50-year-old man was injured. In the evening and morning, enemy drones injured 3 more civilians. According to the Kherson Military Administration, in January alone, 29 people were killed and 237 were wounded in the Kherson region.
That's all for today, but very soon on the Front News program, new, unique materials from our journalists in the hottest spots of the war, gathered so that you know the truth. This was Vladimir Timoshenko. Take care of yourself and your loved ones.